1, 2, 3, 4.
This video is the pilot episode for a series of videos that Vince and I are planning. It's an extension, a natural progression of the conversations we had before on and off camera, where we said that there's a lot of concepts in the painting community that are misconceptions and that are holding back a lot of painters in their journey. So what we want to do in each of these videos is take a look at one of these myths or concepts and shed some light on them and decide whether or not they have a grain of truth in them or if they should be dismissed. So this first episode is meant for us to find the right groove, the right formats and how to do things. So after you watch the first episode, please let us know if you enjoyed it or if there's room for improvement. If you have any suggestions for topics, if you want us to debunk a particular myth, let us know in the comments section. And now, enjoy the first episode. So thanks a lot, Vince, for coming on and for agreeing to do this segment. The first statement that I picked for us to deconstruct or confirm, whatever it's going to be. And I picked this one deliberately and with consideration because it's you that I'm talking to. Because you have tried every single paint, every single product out there available for miniature painting, which makes you the perfect candidate to talk about the first idea that I want to throw out there, which exists in the painting community. And that is that you need a lot of paints to be a good painter.
Yeah, so this is a well-known sentiment. You're absolutely right to come to me on this. Let me say that I'm surrounded by maybe 600 or 700 paints of every brand. I love buying paint. I love experimenting with paint. It is fun. Do you need them? Short answer, no. Right now, actually, the thing I'm painting, this is the palette I'm using. I don't know if you can see it, but that's, you know, basically the primary colors plus white and black. That is obviously all you actually need.
What Vince is referring to here is obviously mixing from primary colors. Primary referring to their position in the color circle, which originates from the physical properties of light when spread into a spectrum through a prism. Color wheels have seen many evolutions and iterations. Red, blue and yellow are primary colors here, from which you can mix secondary colors like orange, green, purple and eventually all colors in between with using black and white to adjust values. For example, you would never have to buy a single pot of skin tone color. It's very easy to achieve any variety of skin tones through mixing.
But especially when you're new, especially when you're starting out, if you don't have that full mastery of color theory and how to mix, having those different paints can be valuable. It can help you because you don't know how to get that particular shade or that particular color. Just having it there in the pot to access is just far more useful and really lowers the learning curve, the barrier of entry in, by being able to just pick it up and go out of the pot and go.
So for newer painters, often this is not a concept that is easy to grasp, especially when there are so many other things to think about and learn when just getting into the hobby. And we must not forget that there is a socialization aspect to this. We are told that ultramarines have to be painted a certain way and to be shaded and highlighted a certain way. And once that concept is ingrained, it's hard to let go. Obviously, we're not here to talk premix colors down. Remember, the question is, do you need a lot of colors? So it also makes sense to look at when is it a good idea to have premix colors. Because when we talk about this question, we have to make the distinction between, are you painting an army or are you painting a single figure for your showcase?
That is such a good point, yes, because I love working from a limited palette, especially on a single figure. It's fun, right? You get to really carefully control every color you're going to mix out. You get to play like mad scientist. It's cool, right? But doing that same thing across an army can be pretty intimidating. If you've got 100 or 150 figs and you need this particular shade of off red, well, mixing that every time can be really tough, fig to fig, to keep it consistent. And maybe you could mix a whole bunch of it beforehand. You could put it in a bottle. This is just a pre-made bottle, actually, of my own paint mix. But again, that's still going to be challenging. You still have to take a lot of time, get it exactly right, mix it in the largest amount. Whereas it can be a lot easier to just go, oh, let me grab, okay, that's going to be my main color, that's going to be my highlight, that's going to be my shadow color for my primary thing. There we go. And then maybe I'll just mix amongst these three. You can then maintain a lot more consistency, especially for a newer painter.
We need to mention that there is other interpretations of the color wheel. For example, cyan, magenta, yellow as primaries, from which you can mix all subsequent colors. Personally, I prefer the real color wheel because it's based on pigment rather than how light interacts, for example on a monitor, and it doesn't rely on using black pigments for mixing. The take-home message here is that multiple approaches work for mixing, and it's just one example for how we experience colors and painting as a whole in a very idiosyncratic way. And it's influenced by what our goals are and what we are actually painting. So how many different brands of colors do we need? Do we need Scale Color and Reaper and Games Workshop and Vallejo?
Well, the answer is no. You need one. One is the answer. But that being said, what I have found is I don't go to other brands because the other brand is magical and new or does some amazing thing as a brand. What I found is, in fact, color to color within the brand. That's what I go to, because a certain paint is more performant, is more smooth, is more opaque, is more easier to blend, has a brighter, more vivid color, more pigment intense, whatever, right? You can pick 10 different ways that you might be aiming for them to be different. So brand to brand, you can find things that suit your individual style.
Yeah, so the concept in there is that you're going to have to find out what suits you best, what works for your personal style of painting.
Yeah, and I think that's something that develops over time, right? Like that is a very personalized thing. You and I have different painting styles. So a paint you like for a particular purpose, I might actually not like for that same, it might not be as performant for me, which means that takes a lot of time and money and experimentation. It also means you have to have a style, right? Which isn't necessarily something you have right away.
So where does the impression that you need a lot of colors come from? Maybe it's coming from the publicity some colors get because of well-known individuals using them. They have found their style. They have done the experimentation and have come up with solutions to their problems. And sometimes the colors they use become synonym to a solution for a general problem in painting, even though it might not suit everyone's style. But since this particular color works for this great painter, it has to work for everyone. But that is failing to see and trying to understand the principle behind it, and instead just putting a band-aid on it. Let me give you an example. Vince has identified two colors that I use a lot for highlighting.
You're gonna watch somebody mention ice yellow or glacier blue, like anytime you watch a Trevelyan video, for example.
He means wolf gray in my case, of course, but the name of the color does not matter. I'm sure the glacier blue is what he uses to apply the principle. That is the reason behind using these colors, which he also mentions.
Because you'll start to learn that it's much better to use color infused lighting instead of highlights instead of just dead white and so on and so forth. Okay, cool.
The more general principles you understand about painting, the less fear of missing out you have towards certain colors, and the more likely it is that you will find your own solutions. For example, the infamous ice yellow can be mixed using yellow and white. So far, our conclusion is you don't need a lot of paint, but you need a lot of experience with a lot of paint to find what works for you. This can be overwhelming. Could we have some kind of advice here, please?
So I think there's a fine line to walk here at the beginning. Sure, get enough colors that you're not mixing like crazy and going mad, but don't feel like you've got to rush out to the market and buy every paint out there. If you're just buying duplicate colors and you haven't really established a style or technique and you're still experimenting, your style is still changing, then, maybe you're fine. Stick with what you got.
I think it also teaches you a lot about painting. When you have a handful of paints, you're eventually maybe going to run into limitations, and then you can see, okay, what am I actually missing? And at that point you realize what you can do with a limited palette and what you cannot do and where you need to upgrade.
Absolutely. I think that as you go along that progression, you're going to see the holes in your line and what you're kind of feeling like you need.
So how do we know when to get more paint? One recommendation that I have is ask yourself the question, do I have a use for it? Yeah, you mentioned the whites, and I have my two favorite whites with me, an ink and the Chimera white. Why was it so hard for me to find a good white? It's because whenever you get say a Games Workshop white or Vallejo white or whatever white you start out with, either they're not really high quality pigments, or white pigment to start with is maybe too big, and you just can't get that consistent layer. So what you are looking for, or what I was looking for, was something that is really dense and at the same time has small pigments, which, you know, is when inks come into play. And also the new Chimera color just has that property that I was looking for. Vince has a good point to make. A problem for you might be a non-issue for someone else.
You also are a heavy glaze painter. You use a lot of like very controlled glazes often, even with bright colors. So having something that's super pigment rich that you could thin and still control and would still actually be white and not just chalk meant a lot to you. But then compare that to somebody maybe like a Ben Kometz, who uses just like a heavy body acrylic, like a Schminke white, right? Because he's often using it in a heavy way through something like a loaded brush, famously, or something else, where he's applying a big dab of it and then feathering or something, right? So he might have a different paint that he's aiming at. Your own personal style, you at home viewer, might be completely different if you're working in a different style.
It's easy to get stuck in chasing after the solutions that work for others, and then they might not work for you. And it's difficult to judge that properly, especially when you don't have that much experience. Ask yourself if any of the properties of the color you want to buy solves a particular problem you're facing. Then yes, if a product exists that will make your life easier, get it. But if you want to get a new paint simply because through some ethereal, not graspable reason it's going to make you a better painter, then you should probably refrain from buying it. And that applies to just about every product out there, in my opinion.
This is the sort of Kickstarteritis, right? Where a new paint is coming out, it seems like every day. Is this the one that's going to solve all of your problems? I mean, my unfortunate answer is probably not. But can there be some that might be more useful for you, depending on what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve and what you need? Yeah, absolutely. That's where it could be.
Something else I wanted to explore in this video is the question of, as a beginner, do you need anything else than acrylics? One thing that I always say to everyone that asks me about my painting is that I just like acrylics because you can do most things with them. Obviously they have limitations, like you cannot get them as smooth as oil paints, but you know, when it comes to weathering, you have colors that look like rust. You don't necessarily need to buy enamel washes that simulate rust. However, I feel like sometimes you get products that are superior to acrylic paint. I mean, that rust enamel wash is just going to look a lot more like rust. Or sometimes you want pigments because of their dry look that you cannot replicate with glossy acrylics, or even slightly glossy acrylics.
No, I think it's a great point. When you talk about specialty products, right, where you're talking about, this isn't really standard paint, but streaking grime, right, or raw pigment, or something like that. Those do just have a different property. Now, can you achieve amazing stuff without them? Sure. Richard Gray did that big Zinch Imperial Night or Night Cerestis or whatever it was for Salute a couple years back, that had the big flower and all the gorgeous model. That was all, it has streaks and grime and rust and stuff all over it. That was just pure acrylic paint. He didn't use any specialty products on that, whatever. The reality is streaking grime has a really good, cool look that looks like the thing. And pigments do look dry and dusty, and it's really hard to replicate some of that stuff just using standard acrylic paints.
Yeah, so I think maybe acrylics are more of a versatility product that can do everything good enough. And then there's the specialty products that do one thing very well.
Yeah, here's the simple example almost all the viewers will be familiar with. Blood for the Blood God. I think some people might overuse it a little, but it's a wonderful technical paint. It does what it purports to do really well. Look like glossy, slick, fresh blood, right? Now that's a very thin use. That is a one function paint, but it does that thing superlatively. Now, could you do that in other ways? Could you go out and get some Tamiya Clear X27 and mix it up? Yeah, sure. Of course, that's what people did for a long time. But like, that's a lot more complicated. Could you take a red paint and mix in some gloss and some flow improver and stuff like that, maybe a little gel medium? Yeah, of course you could do that. Or you could just buy the fit to form thing.
There is a catch with all of these products. They will not magically make you a better painter. Of course, it depends on the level of quality that you're aiming for. Anyone can slap down an oil wash all over the miniature, and sometimes people are going to be happy with it. But there's also some people still painting miniatures with enamel paints, like 35 years ago. You can't expect to use these special products right away and have them fix everything for you. If used improperly, they will drag down your results.
I mean, fortunately, we do live in an age where I think that happily lots of people have done tutorials on this stuff. But I think you need to be aware that you're starting not from zero, but you're going back down. You need to relearn some stuff, right? So when you pick those up, don't expect them to just work.
So why is this not a clear yes or no, busted or confirmed myth situation? Why can't we say you need X amount of paints and this is exactly what you should go for?
When it comes to these paints and how you use them, we're all chefs, not bakers. A baker is chemistry. You have to add X and Y and Z in exact ratios to make the chemical reactions happen, to make the cake or the cookies or whatever you're baking happen. But that's not what we are, right? We're chefs. We're taking a bunch of recipes and making a soup and being like, let me add a little more of that. Let me add a little more of that. How's that look? Let me taste it. Okay, a little more of that in there. That's how we all work with our colors. And I think that when you look at these paints, everybody's going to use them slightly differently person to person, because this is not a science, because your own style, your own techniques, what you favor, heck, even the local humidity where you are probably all factors into how valuable you find a particular paint. I can't say this is the best blue and make that an objective statement. I can say, I really like this blue for me because it does XYZ. For you, it might be completely different.
I think Vince gave a perfect summary to the problem at hand.
One summary thought that I have about this topic of do you need a lot of paints is the thing that I want to hone in on that we talked about here is to be aware of the paint treadmill. This is a hobby. It's fun. We want to support our hobby. You want to support your hobby. You want to spend some money. You want to go out and try new stuff. There's nothing wrong with that instinct. That's cool. That's fun. Enjoy your hobby. Find paints. Experiment with them. But don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like if you don't have this brand of paints, you're not a better painter. That's the false myth that I want to disrupt more than anything. There is nothing wrong with having more paints, but there is nothing necessary about having more paints. And as you go on, you'll find that actually, as you expand, the amount of paints that you feel like you need slightly contracts, because you'll have go-to brands and colors within those brands that you tend to favor and use and like their effect. And as you use them more, you will get more out of them. You'll learn better how to use that one color in more ways to get more effects in more mixes. And it will become a more powerful tool than it was when you just used it because I need a bright yellow. Let me grab the bright yellow bottle.
Thanks for watching. If you want to see more episodes of this, let us know and subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any of the new uploads. Also make sure to follow Vince's channel. You can find the link in the description below, along with all the other important links and materials mentioned and used in this video. See you next time.